estate, I know when I very first got started trying to buy up real estate, I heard of subject to loans and I thought, this is it for me. I'm going to get into as many of these deals with as little money as possible at the lowest interest rate ever. It's going to be great. And the reality of it is that these deals only work for sellers in certain situations. I spent so much time trying to essentially cram all of these deals into something that it didn't quite fit for. So subject to is a great just arrow in your quiver, but to try to make it a main acquisition point, I think is definitely a kind of struggle to do because again, it doesn't work for everyone. If someone wants to turn around and buy another property, this can be difficult because in a subject to transaction, the deed is moving over to another party, but the debt is remaining in the seller's name. Therefore, if I am purchasing a property from the seller subject to, I am agreeing on a purchase price. I am either paying them the difference in a down payment, and then the loan stays in their name, but I make payments on their behalf. So that debt is not in my name. The debt is in the seller's name. This can make it difficult for them to, as I mentioned, turn around and go get another loan. And there are lenders out there that can help with this. However, some sellers are going to be a little bit difficult to deal with if they go through their preferred lender and they're not able to get a pre-approval. Now, I haven't personally dealt with this, but I am a member of the sub-2 community. I've seen other people that have had struggles in that sense. So, again, there are great applications for subject to loans. You can certainly get someone out from a pickle really with one of these things, especially if the seller doesn't have any equity. So where I'm seeing these deals make sense is when the seller, again, has very little equity. They've put maybe 0% down if it's a VA loan, maybe 3.5% or a 3% conventional loan. And it costs about 6% to sell a property. Not to mention if a property was, say, damaged by someone else or something had happened. That can be an opportunity for you as the investor to step in and take over. Now, these loans were great to get into in 2020, 2021, when you were walking into someone with no equity at a 2% interest rate. Those 2% interest rates have been gone for 3 years, yet prices have continued to go up. So it gets very tough to structure these deals in today's market because think about it, if the property's appreciated, that seller now needs to get paid out on their equity. So unless you're willing to put down a large payment in order to make up for that equity difference, then you're going to have to create a secondary note. And if you're now making a payment to the seller and a payment to the original lender, then it's going to be very tough to cash flow that property unless you have some sort of creative way, an Airbnb, a midterm rental, a pad split, something of that nature in order to be able to get the cash flow that you need. So therefore, a lot of the deals that you're going to see that don't have much equity are deals that have been bought in the last 1-2 years. Interest rates have actually been at the same or maybe even a little bit higher. So you really aren't taking over any good interest rate. Therefore, you would really only be getting into it to get in at a low down payment, which can still be a good way to get property. But there are other kind of cons to be aware of or things to consider. The main risk that you run is that you are technically asking the seller to violate the contract that they signed at close, stating that they will not transfer this property. Now, the Supreme Court did rule that subject to is not fraudulent. There's nothing fraudulent about it. However, you are still asking them to break the contractual agreement they've signed with the lender stating you're not going to sell the property off. Therefore, they can call this property due, which means that they're asking for all of the note, all of the debt to be paid almost immediately. Within 30 to 60 days is typically what you see. It can be pretty difficult to get your hands on that. And if you do not have the equity to refinance into traditional debt, which is typically going to be a 75% loan to value, then you're in a tough spot. Now, there's ways to navigate this, and that's typically from deeding the property back and doing a contract for deed to protect your interest, which you would then, of course, turn around and execute that after you're no longer under the scrutiny of the lender. There's also a lot of things that trigger this. A lot of times it's the insurance not being properly changed. You have to do it a certain way. Typically, we have the seller listed as additional insured, and the lender is still main insured. And then I believe we'll typically get ourselves added as additional insured as well. It's been a little bit since I've purchased one of these. And the irony in creating this video is that I'm actually in the middle of purchasing one of these properties right now. But again, it was where the situation worked. I had a listing. I couldn't get it to sell for this seller. They were up at a point where they were completely up against their mortgage payment if they were to have sold this property. I do believe the property is just stigmatized from having a high days on market because they wanted to start off at a higher price. And I'm now able to take this property over and I'm putting $0 down, and it should cash flow me $400 from day one. Now, it's in a very, very rough area. That's why the sellers are willing to just hand over a property. And I've gained the trust of the sellers. And that's the other biggest thing, is that if the seller doesn't trust you, they're definitely not going to do one of these transactions with you. I mean, you are needing to get a lot of their personal information at the time of close. You are getting their date of birth. You are getting their social security number. You're getting their logins to their mortgages. You're having them sign a limited power of attorney saying you can act on their behalf for this property. So there definitely has to be a fair level of trust for a seller to be willing to do this. The other big concern is if a seller files bankruptcy. So all those debts are being consolidated when a seller does file bankruptcy. So now you're trying to figure out, how that looks for you and what's going to happen as the person holding the deed to this property. And all of this can really get much more complicated if you wrap the property, which is where you're turning around and then creating arbitrage on the interest and financing the property out to someone else. Now, I've done 3 of these. This last one I'm going to keep myself. The wrap process I just have found is kind of a little bit of a stressful one. And when you want to get a good down payment, you are actually getting rid of the deed. I've found that these buyers are asking for a full warranty deed transfer, which is how it's done here in Missouri. And it no longer gives you the remedy of if the note gets called, because you no longer have the deed. So you now open yourself up to a whole nother set of liability. So make sure you are disclosing absolutely everything up front, and the seller understands all of the pitfalls. The fact that it could make it difficult for them to get financing in the future, the fact that it could be called due on sale, the fact that you cannot promise that after a certain amount of time that this property will not show up on their debt to income, even though the payments are being made. These are all things to really consider, and make sure you have all of the proper disclosure that you're getting signed, making sure that you're getting the insurance proceeds, because what if the house burns down and they get the check? You think they're going to come back and do the right thing and give the check to you? That's why you get something signed, just making sure. So and if you don't have their social security, you don't have their date of birth, and you get locked out of their portal or anything happens, then you're going to be unable to obtain all the much needed financial information, which can put you in a tight spot. It's also can be difficult to find a proper title company to handle these deals and properly do them. And then, as I mentioned, wraps can just make them a little bit more complicated and risky in that sense. That's coming from someone that's actually done 3 of them now. So I hope that this is insightful to some. Subject to can be a great tool. As I mentioned, I'm in the process of buying one right now for one of my clients. But I wouldn't try to necessarily max yourself out on these kinds of loans or make it a primary strategy. Just keep it as an arrow in the quiver. And perhaps some people disagree with me in the comments. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts, and we'll just kind of keep moving along. So thanks everyone for listening. Bye.